Hello, this is the 120th issue of Catch of the Day, available on the Branch Talk YouTube channel. Today we're going to continue reading from Doug Mitchell's book, When the Siege Has Ended, EZ5, The Judgment for the Living. Starting at the top of page 16, therein we have the same distinction between the words in the midst of and round about her, since the Hebrew text there reads the same as in verse 2 in regards to the locations where the judgments take place. So also Numbers 2 verse 2, 11:31 and 32, Joshua 21:11 and 42, 1 Kings 4:31, Psalms 34:7 and Psalms 97 verse 2, for places where the Hebrew word translated about it in Ezekiel 5:2 is translated to mean an area outside of and surrounding another area. We are pointing this out because the judgment upon the first third was to take place in the midst of the city, the ministry, while the second phase of the judgment was to take place in the area surrounding, about the city, the ministry, that is, the active laity. Note that the type of judgment on the first part of the hair is different from that on the second part of it, though there is a similarity. That is, the difference is that the first portion of the hair was to be burnt in the fire, while the second portion was to be smitten with a knife. The Hebrew word translated knife in verses 1 and 2 is translated sword around 401 times of its 413 occurrences, and is also the same word translated sword in verse 2. So we will use the word sword herein to refer to it so as to maintain the Bible consistency. Similarly, between the first and second phases of judgment is that both the fire and the sword represent inspired truth. Another difference between the two phases is in the fact that a sword represents something generally used in time of conflict, war, while fire, though also used in warfare, has a much broader usage. In 1955, when the new message of the opening of the judgment for the living came to both the Davidian and SDA leaderships, there was no real conflict over it going on in the church, in general because it went to the leadership first. But when it went to the rest of the congregations, there was a warfare against it instigated by both of those ministries because they were actively working to keep the light from the people. This is especially true when Ben Roden introduced the feast days. Therefore, when the present truth message came to both the SDA and Davidian laities, those round about the city, the ministry, they found themselves in the midst of the warfare against it brought on by those in the ministries, and had to either join in with the unjust opposition to it and find themselves smitten by that sword of truth, or surrender to it and be spared. Note that it says that that sword was only to smite the second portion of the hair, not slay it. The Hebrew word translated smite there is a different word than slay, as in Ezekiel 9:6. Being smitten, wounded, with a sword does not necessarily lead to death. Thus, due to the controversy caused by the ministries, the SDAs, and the Davidians, warfare against the message, many of the laity in the church, those round about the city, the ministry, were in one way or another wounded, smitten, when they were confronted by the sword of truth and fought against it. Those of the laity who would not honestly and prayerfully investigate the message, and who turned a blind eye and deaf ear to the unjust way the ministers were treating those who accepted the message, fell backwards in their spiritual walk. The SDA ministers had already rejected the rod message that warned of the coming of the judgment of the living, and now they were bearing the results of their backsliding as that phase of the judgment was opening. The same thing happened in the Davidian congregations, but even more so because they professed to believe the rod message that prophesied of the new message that was to come when the judgment of the living opened, and the nearness of that event. Instead of earnestly preparing themselves to give the loud cry, the SDAs went backwards toward the world and brought many unsanctified theories and practices into their congregations. Even many of the more spiritual ministers among them gave way to the demands of those who wanted to bring in worldly devices in order to make the church appear more appealing to new people, or others who were not fully committed to Christ, His church, and its standards. Though the Davidian congregations didn't go back into the world the same way the SDAs did, they followed after the practices of the fallen churches by following leaders who didn't manifest the true gift of prophecy. As one of the prime tenets of the rod message is that the church must be led through the spirit of prophecy, or any revival and reformation without that gift among them was bound to fail. 1 TG 10:21-27. Then the Davidians, rejecting the living spirit of prophecy in the branch message and choosing to follow the various vice presidents, most of whom did not even claim to have the gift, made them super Laodiceans, saying that because they had the rod message, they were truly rich and increased with goods and in need of nothing. No more prophets, no more truth. Take care.